This work was inspired by Ivan to a great extent, and some of the work I did together with Ivan, so I acknowledge this, and I'm happy to do so. I had this slide, but I don't really need this anymore because we have seen sluicing, and we know what it is. But the example in 2, that's something similar to sluicing, except that we have an XP instead of a WH phrase, and it's also left stranded, and it has the semantics of an declarative clause. Now the phenomenon here is that we can have the prepositions, or we can omit them from the remnants, as long as the correlate is a PP. So in 1, the correlate is for an addition, and in 2, in. They're separated by stranding. Now the problem is this. We have one account of this phenomenon. It's syntactic, and it refers to preposition stranding under WH movement. What I'm going to show you today is an attempt to have a different account that does not make any reference to preposition stranding. But before I do that, let us look at the preposition stranding generalization and what it predicts. So the derivation is as shown in 3. And the predictions here are that languages that allow preposition stranding under WH movement will also allow prepositions to go missing from ellipsis, remnants in the 2 constructions that we are looking at, so in sluicing and in fragment answers. Now I'm going to look at 3 languages here, English, Norwegian, and Polish. Polish is very interesting because although the preposition stranding generalization has had many problems in the sense that counterexamples have been found, but what has usually happened is that you can have some sort of pseudo-sluicing source for the remnant, and then you don't need an interrogative clause where stranding would be illegal. So that's how you can overcome the problem. Oh, sorry. But Polish seems to be nice, I would think, because it seems to be one genuine counterexample to this generalization, because it does not have any pseudo-sluicing source. And I found it myself. I've done a lot of experimental work on this, and there is none. But you can still omit prepositions from remnants. So what is my account here? I'm going to use the work by Ariel, who worked on NP and Afra. And what she shows is that when you take an anaphoric expression, the more informative it is, then its antecedent is going to be less salient. And on the other hand, if you have a salient or accessible in the mental, in memory. So accessible antecedents are going to be referred to by anaphoric expressions that are not very informative, such as pronouns, for example. Now, if we apply this to sluicing and fragment answers, there are certain predictions that we can make. And the first prediction is that when you consider a remnant that's either a PP or an NP, so we're missing the preposition, they differ in informativity. So we can say that the remnant that does have a preposition is more informative than the remnant that does not have the preposition. And then if we develop an approach along these lines, we make the prediction that it should be possible to omit prepositions from remnants in every language. It's a very strong claim, and I realize that it needs verification, but for the languages that I'm looking at here, this is true. Now, it's not just the antecedent that we need to focus on, right, in terms of its accessibility, or the remnant, I'm sorry. But also here for the 2 constructions that we're looking at, the correlate, so that PP phrase in the antecedent. And its accessibility is going to be crucial here, because then the form of the remnant will depend on it. But how do we, what about the accessibility of the correlate? How do we measure this? So here I'm proposing that we can refer to informativity again. This is building on Ariel and Philip's work as well. And here is my metric here. So this is actually Philip's idea originally, personal communication. So here's what I do here. So to try and measure the informativity of a phrase, I have these like 10 features. They're arbitrary because you can have more. I have these syntactic category, number, grammatical, gender, case. These are there so I can capture Polish because it has overt cases. Of course, English is not going to express these features. But I need something that can cover, the languages that I'm looking at. So some of these are syntactic and some are semantic. And now what do we do? If we have a phrase like a gentleman, what is it expressing? Syntactic category, number, animacy, it's also human, not concrete, natural gender is expressed. So I just count the numbers of features, divide them by 10, which is the maximum number of features, and I get the score. So for a gentleman, the score would be 0.70, and for an interrogative pronoun like something, the score would be 0.40, because here we only have the syntactic category, number, minus human, and the reference, of course, as a singleton set. So this is my metric here. Now what happens? I have looked at lots of different data. I'm not going to be able to walk you through the methodology here because of the time I have. But what I did find in the data is that the higher informativity score for the correlate, the more likely it is that the remnant does not have the preposition. This is true of corpus data. This is true of acceptability judgments, which I have for Norwegian, for Polish, not for English, because for English I use the 100 split task and corpus data. So you do get that pattern. It's statistically significant because I've developed regression models of these data. So I'm positive this is so. But there's a, oh, right. And now look at this. This is a nice example from English. Oh, sorry about that. Reprise questions. I actually looked at the two constructions, sluicing and fragment answers, plus I identified reprise questions as a subtype of sluicing mostly, because they do have some idiosyncratic features, such as what is illustrated in 4 and 5. You really are going to have the prepositions in the remnants. And these are examples from my corpora. I use the Switchboard, Santa Barbara, and Coca for English. These are actual examples. So here for 4, we have the pronoun that, and the remnant is not known. So the speaker B is just asking what does that refer to. And in 5, we have someone's name. And again, there's a misunderstanding here. We have not identified the referent. Usually when I have a proper name, now, I hope this is the correct way to do things, but usually when I have a proper name, I give it the maximum acceptability score. Because, when you have a proper name, you know exactly what the referent is. But as you can see in reprise questions, in these cases, there's something wrong with informativity here, right? Because we have not identified Yanni, or the person who's called that. At least speaker B has not done that. So reprise questions, in short, they have strong tendency to appear with remnants with prepositions. But look at 6 now. When you have, now we have the correlate with the car, right? It contains an NP, so its informativity score would be 0.60. so a high one. No, we don't have a preposition. I found an interaction here when I did my statistical analysis. So even though there's a main effect of reprise questions in terms of the pattern of, in terms of the realization of the remnant, but when you have something like 6, you have preposition omission more often, and that's also significant, which I attribute to the fact that in 6 we have a correlate with a high informativity score. Now there's a twist to the story here. I looked at the Norwegian data, and there was an eye tracking study. And what I found, and again, I'm not going to be able to tell you what I did, but I collected all the standard measures, including the first fixation on the remnant region, which was the preposition and the object, if there was a preposition. And also for the cases where there was a preposition in the remnant, I divided the remnants into those where the prepositions were actually fixated, because that matters. Sometimes they're just skipped in reading. So what I found that for every single remnant that has a preposition in it, and when that preposition is fixated, you have the first fixation is always shorter for when you have seen the preposition. And that means that that preposition sends you right back to the correlate. So it's actually easier to find the correlate when you have the preposition, because your correlate is more informative. So what about this? And now, we get to the overall preferences, because you wouldn't be surprised if I tell you that remnants with prepositions in English are just preferred. You want remnants without prepositions most of the time. The same is true of Norwegian, and when I did my acceptability judgment study, people consistently rated remnants with prepositions as less acceptable than remnants without prepositions. Now for Polish, we get the opposite tendency. People like remnants with prepositions. You get the same pattern in corpus data, which I also collected for Polish. So opposite patterns, but in all 3 languages, you do have the informativity effect. So why is that? Here, when we look at this, we have to, maybe we get the feeling, okay, well, we're going to say as English and Norwegian allow prepositions stranding in interrogative clauses. That's why you get the difference. But I did something else, because I had another idea here. I looked at multi-word verbs, which are combinations of verbs and prepositions which have different degrees of compositionality. And here we're talking about prepositional verbs. We have a case study done of this in the Printing and Traugott book. And they show that there is a gradient. We have combinations where the verb and the preposition are not compositional. They always go together, not just in ellipsis. No, I'm sorry, like in question, interrogative clauses, in clefs, everywhere. And then there are combinations where there is more compositionality. So, for example, the preposition depends on the verb, or vice versa. And both English and Norwegians have that sort of multi-word verb. So, I'm using English as a test case here. I'm using Hawkins's entailment test because he has done something very similar. He wanted to measure the degree of semantic dependence between verbs and prepositions when he was looking at the word order of PPs following verbs. And these are his tests. What he did was that he would assign independent or dependent features to verbs and prepositions, and it was enough for him that something, say a preposition depended on the verb, or the verb on the preposition, and that meant dependence. And then there was independence when neither depended on each other. And there are the proverb sentences that he used as a means to test that. I've done it a little different because I have 3 different levels of dependence. Level 0, when nothing depends on anything, so you would have something like jog in the park, and you take the verb jog, and in independent. You can parse, you know, the PP in the part is independent of the verb, and so is the verb of the PP. Level 1, where one can depend on the other, doesn't matter which, but I looked at both patterns. And then level 2, you have the strongest degree of dependence, and the verb depends on the preposition and vice versa. And now look how nicely it looks in my data. These are remnants with prepositions and without, and the dark ones have no prepositions, the lighter ones have prepositions, and this all depends on the level. See, when there is no dependence here, you have a lot of prepositions. You have one level dependent, and you have fewer remnants with prepositions, and a lot of them have no. And then for the strongest level, you have this many remnants with prepositions. So this is exactly the way I expected. And I also did a little historical study of this because you can trace the development of prepositional verbs in English. You just need to look, you know, at Middle English, and which is where the story begins. There's a nice study of prepositional verbs done by someone else than me. I just looked at ellipsis there, but again, no time for that. So what happens? I think there is some sort of reanalysis. I do not mean to say this is syntactic because there's, you know, the original Hornstein and Weinberg paper, right? That has a lot of problems. I wouldn't want to say this, but I do want to say that there is something going on in the semantics here because we do think of these combinations like this, where originally you have a verb and a PP, then you grab the verb and the P, and they are one thing. And then the stay out. Hawkins says that this is what the human processor likes. So if there is semantic dependence between a verb and a preposition, that means we need simultaneous access to both during processing, and we consider them as a unit. And now my examples here. I'm not a native speaker of English, but I have a sense that this is pretty wrong. Like, we don't really want that preposition here in 7 and in 8. And consider that we have all 4 prepositional verbs come across. Prepositional verb. So you don't want the preposition in the remnant because you don't have the verb in the remnant. And they are one thing. Right? That will be my explanation here. So that's like the last slide. So what do we get out of this? The remnants with prepositions do facilitate retrieval of correlates. We have seen that in Norwegian. We have also seen in all 3 languages that the higher the informativity score for the correlate, the more likely it is that you're going to get a remnant with without the preposition. But crucially, we need to look at these multi-word verbs because English has them, Norwegian has them, but Polish doesn't. And that's how we can explain the fact that Polish likes remnants with prepositions better than English and Norwegian. And that brings me to the last point. We have an account that does not refer to the possibility of prepositions stranding in constructive clauses, which is what was my goal. Thank you, and then thank you, but also I wanted to show you this. This is Ivan and I in Paris, France. This is how when I first met Ivan. So. Thank you. We have a... Can I? Okay.
Could we go back to your 4, 5, 6?
Which one?
Your early slide with examples 4, 5, and 6.
5 and 6.
Okay. So I'm just wondering whether all that's going on might be that speaker B needs to tell speaker A what he or she needs clarification with. So with what, you say, it's the that I didn't understand. But if it was the women I didn't understand, I would say many what. right? I have to put one word in there to tell you which piece of the sentence I'm challenging or pushing. Is that less than your informativity hypothesis, or is it just...
Yeah, that's exactly my explanation for this, because, you know, the fact that you have misheard or misparsed something means that you need clarification and you want to point to that thing unambiguously, because, you know, you already have a misunderstanding. So now, if I'm speaker B, I want to make sure that my question now is understood, right? So I want to make my remnant as informative as I can, without, like, which I can do too. Because with clarification, as Jonathan has shown, you can, you know, that the length of the clarification of question can be of any sort. One more question.
Yeah, but it seems to me that if you follow Janet's idea here, then it would make different predictions if the car occurs twice in the same sentence. So, you know, did the car bump into the other car? Then you would make the prediction then that you would need a preposition in order to query the sentence.
For
Which
six.
car? For six. But you know, if you've got something which is has more informative content, but it occurs twice in the sentence, then you know it's not the informative content that is making the difference with whether you need the preposition. It's how good it is at identifying the place in the sentence that you need clarification.
Yeah, you're right. I did wonder about these examples. I can see this pattern very clearly, you know, in the English, even in the historical data. It's just there, and I guess, because, you know, in 6 we have heard that correlate correctly, right? We just maybe have no idea that there is a car of any kind. So we just want to know what car we're talking about, right? So intuitively, it's a little different than the examples in 4 and 5. At least in 6, we know that there is a car, an object, right? A vehicle. So that probably makes it a little more accessible as a correlate.
But I mean, presumably less accessible if there's more than one, so the informativity of the
That's
thing isn't independent of the context, right?
Sure.
I mean, we should be finishing if we're trying to stay on schedule, but maybe we'll continue in the break.
Yeah.